of decay, and how we can see one of the most challenging cases of decay, how they can pose a problem. And again, the key issue would be that if we manage appropriately in the right time, we will get a good outcome. Otherwise, it will have a significant impact. So we'll go through the basics initially, and then we'll try to go beyond the basics and see how that case, which Dr. Pratik and Dr. Vibha will discuss, which our unit really encountered recently with significant challenges in terms of diagnosis and management, came up, and we'll discuss on that. So we'll start off with the overall presentation. So we all know that DKA is by far the most important pediatric endocrine emergency and the leading cause of death as well as morbidity in type 1 individuals. And we know that management of DKA is very protocolized, easy to do, but there are a lot of challenges which may happen subsequently and which happened in this case in that settings. What, Dr. Sayan, can you name a few top complications that you can think of in DKA that we are worried about?
Worried about will be cerebral edema.
Yeah.
The other complication will be hypokalemia.
Yeah.
And the other complications related to renal failure.
So renal failure, hypokalemia, and cerebral edema. Anything else? Rhabdomyolysis, hypophosphatemia, rhabdomyolysis. Anything else?
The hypoglycemia would be.
So hypoglycemia. So all of those complications, everything happened in this child. And that's why we are going to discuss about that. A case who had 0 bicarbonate, who had very low phosphorus, who had rhabdomyolysis, had renal dysfunction, had cerebral edema. So all the challenges were there, which we had to encounter and manage accordingly, which we'll discuss one by one. All of you can go and have a look at our website, learning.growthsociety.in, where there are a lot of information available with regards to our sources, resources, and courses are available there. And these provide access to a number of our modules. There are other training programs, including fellowship, diploma, and postgraduate courses, which are also available there. And we have got 3 very unique programs which we run every month. First is, of course, this one, which is actually the one for fellows. So this is a grand round which happens once a month, in which we focus on topics which are more advanced in terms of pediatric endocrinology. The second one is what you're witnessing now, which is basically the one for the postgraduate. So today we are discussing about the practitioners and postgraduates. So this is the basic pediatric endocrinology. And from tonight, we're going to start off with a postgraduate lecture series, which will focus on didactic talks and how they can improve the care in terms of postgraduate and pediatricians level. That is the PG lecture series. So today we are talking mainly in terms of this, the postgraduate grand round, and that's what we're talking about, DKA. You can have access to our books and publications which cover both basic as well as advanced pediatric endocrinology, and our mobile application, which will show how it will help in appropriate management in this setting. So this is the postgraduate lecture series, which is starting today from growth assessment at 9 p.m. So all of you have got the link and you can join that as well. And this is like over 3-year period. We're going to cover each topic over time on that perspective. So let's start with DKA. The pathophysiology of DKA essentially is very simple. You've got insulin deficiency on one hand and counter-regulatory excess on the other. Counter-regulatory excess is very important because it has been shown that if you have somebody who has got a multiple pituitary hormone deficiency, the likelihood of DKA will become less. So this is something important. So you need to have also a counter-regulatory excess in that regards. Both these factors have their own effects individually. So insulin deficiency will basically cause lipolysis and ketosis, and this is going to cause a lot of problems like ketoacidosis, acidotic breathing, abdominal pain, and fruity odor, which will happen in that perspective. The excess of counter-regulatory hormone along with insulin deficiency will cause increased glucose production via glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, and therefore you will have hyperglycemia, and this hyperglycemia will cause osmotic diuresis. Whenever you lose water, you also take along with that potassium and sodium. So there is a significant deficit of these electrolytes which happens, and this understanding becomes important in that perspective. And of course, volume will become less. Now, if your volume was less, what will happen in response to low volume?
So volume is less, so ADH will increase.
Yes.
In the term of the osmolarity. Aldosterone will.
So volume is less, which will increase first, ADH or aldosterone? Aldosterone. So aldosterone will increase, and what will it do?
Aldosterone will increase the will worsen more hypokalemia.
So you will have secondary hyperaldosteronism and you will have hypokalemia. ADH, once your volume is below 10-15%, your ADH will also increase and that will worsen hyponatremia. So we talk always that if you have sustained hyponatremia, this is AVP excess. Sustained hypokalemia is aldosterone excess. So here in DK, you have got both AVP excess, which is going to cause persistent sodium loss or sodium deficit, and you have got hyperaldosteronism, which is going to worsen your hypokalemia in that perspective. So this hypovolemia is a vicious cycle which is happening in that regards. And this is going to increase the counter-regulatory hormone as well, because then the glucose will go up more. So you have got more glucose, more dehydration, more counter-regulatory hormone, more, again, the whole cycle will continue in that perspective. So if you don't break that cycle, this is going to be a very bad situation and ultimately it will culminate into mortality in that perspective. So this RAS excess will cause hypokalemia, and this is what Manoj was talking about. Now, what is the impact of all this in terms of the overall body system? So we all know that there is dehydration. The typical level of dehydration in DK is 7 to 10%. Now, as we have discussed, there are various ways you can assess dehydration in DKA, which are unreliable, Dr. Vibha, and which are reliable.
So oral glucose is unreliable.
Yeah.
Skip turbidity is unreliable.
Yeah.
And the reliable one is the capillary refill time and the peripheral pulses
and blood pressure. So very important to remember is that if you look at tongue mucosa, you will overestimate dehydration. If you look at skin turgor, you will underestimate dehydration because you have hyperosmolality, which is there. So what you should look for is whether the CFT, the capillary refill time, is prolonged, whether the pulses are feeble, whether you have hypotension. Now that brings us to a question, is shock common in DKA?
Shock is not common.
Why, despite having 10-15% dehydration?
So because we have so much counter-regulatory hormone excess, it is preserved.
So whatever we treat for shock, be it epinephrine, be it cortisol, all of them are very high. So clearly shock is unusual. So if you have somebody who has DKA, who develops shock, start thinking of alternate possibilities, whether there is cerebral edema, whether there is a septic shock, whether there is some other illness which is causing that in that perspective. So volume deficit is 7 to 10%, but there is clear-cut studies show that we are not very good in judging that. So what could be the alternate way of judging the volume deficit? We can use pH as a surrogate criteria. Now, of course, clinical assessment is important, but you can look at pH. So what do you think, Dr. Pratik, would be the reasonable one to say, okay, this pH, this much would be the dehydration roughly?
So you can divide it to mild moderate. So 7.3, 7.2, 7.1, you can divide mild moderate to 5, 7, 10.
Exactly. So if your pH is below 7, most of our cases will be below 7 when we talk about severe DKA. Assume a 10% dehydration, that is a reasonable one. 7 to 7.1 to 2, maybe 7% depending upon clinical condition, and beyond 7.2, not more than 5 to 7%. So you should do a one step below in terms of dehydration, which is there in that perspective. That is important. What about sodium? We all know that there is a deficiency of sodium which is there. Do we underestimate or overestimate sodium deficit, Dr. Manoj?
Sodium deficit.
Yeah.
We are overestimating.
We are overestimating because there is a pseudo hyponatremia. So we all know that for every 100 milligram per DL increase in terms of glucose, the sodium, because of the osmotic drift, decreases by 1.6 to 2, whichever formula you want to use. So you have to use a corrected sodium. And the corrected sodium is the most important parameter to look at when you're looking at a child with DKA. And that is what we'll discuss also in this perspective, in this case, in that regards. What about potassium? So potassium is on the lower side. Do we underestimate or overestimate, Dr. Vibha, the potassium deficit in this setting?
Underestimate the potassium because if insulin deficiency and potassium to move out of the cell, and what potassium we get is generally lower than the.
So potassium is largely an intracellular compound. So if you are losing potassium in the blood, you have enough store which will send it to the blood. So if you have insulin deficiency, if you have acidosis, as Dr. Vibha said, potassium comes out. But as soon as you correct the acidosis, as soon as you give insulin, this potassium will go into the cell and you will have severe hypokalemia. So we all know that if your potassium is below 3.5 at presentation, you should give potassium right at the time of correction. Second, if your potassium goes below 3.5 anytime during treatment, you have to think of reducing insulin dose, giving potassium infusion. And potassium was a major problem which happened in this channel. We'll discuss to why that happened and how we could have stabilized that in that perspective. Now, how do you really calculate? We talked about sodium. All of us know that 1.6 per 100. Is there a way to correlate pH, metabolic acidosis, with potassium?
It is 0.6. I think.
So for every decline in pH by 0.1, the potassium will go up by 0.6. So if your pH is 6.9, roughly you are 3 millimoles extra per liter in what you're getting. So if your potassium estimate is 5, it's actually 2. So you have to be very, very cautious. And this is a very important point, which we'll focus in this case as to that 3.6 potassium that we saw with no pH means 0 potassium effectively. So we had to have our aggressive action right at that time in the beginning, which probably was missed in that perspective. Now, potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium, these three have similarity. What is that?
They are all intercellular.
And if you lose one, the other will also be lost. So what it tells us is that in DK, you will also have low magnesium and low phosphorus. So in very severe decay, one thing which is always missed is phosphorus deficiency, which also happened in this case. So phosphorus also be very, and if you have refractory hypokalemia, think of magnesium deficiency. That is another big message I like to give in that regards. So acidosis, as discussed, and insulin deficiency will cause potassium to go out. As soon as you treat, there will be an exchange and you will have a sudden fall in potassium in that regards. Now, how do we treat? The first treatment is with fluid, and we have discussed it many times that as soon as you give fluid, the volume expands. So there is a hemodilution of glucose. And second, there is a fall in the counter-regulatory hormone, and you will have a decline in glucose by around 100 milligram per DL just after giving a 10%, 10 ml per kg of saline. So if you have mild decay also, it's always better in that setting, give them some fluid and then send them home, because then your whole process will be better off. We have seen also in a few cases that if you just give them insulin, it will not be enough. Give them some fluid in the emergency room and then they can go. It will be better in that regard, because this counter-regulatory hormone is a major problem which will be there in that perspective. But you have to give insulin to correct overall with regards to the ketosis process, and that will be important. Now, if you give too much fluid, Dr. Pratik, what are the problems which will happen? Yeah, so there are a lot of debates whether fluid itself is responsible, but I would still say that in our perspective, fluid is very important. Don't give too much because that will cause too much pressure, cerebral edema. Second,
yes, we can get hypochloremic acidosis.
Too much fluid usually means too much chloride. So in that perspective, you will cause hyperchloremic acidosis. How can you reduce this problem?
So basically, we can try between N/2 and N/4.
So N/2 after initial stabilization, maybe 1, then some other solutions like Hartmann solutions have got lower chloride. And third, you potassium chloride, you half give potassium phosphate, half as potassium chloride. If it is moderate, mild severity, and when I'm saying mild, it is usually above 7 also I consider as mild, because what we see severe or very severe is 6.9, 6.8. This is not a big problem. But if you have very severe acidosis, then it becomes a problem in that perspective. So very importantly, too much fluid will cause hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, and it will cause cerebral edema. What will too much insulin cause, Dr. Vibha?
So hypokalemia.
And hypoglycemia, of course. You will have rapid fall in potassium, rapid fall in glucose. So this is very important thing to happen. What do you expect the sodium to do during this course of treatment?
Sodium should, the corrected sodium should stabilize.
And the actual measured sodium?
Measured sodium shouldn't rise.
Measured sodium should rise. Then only your corrected sodium will be normal. So measured sodium goes up, and often you will see that the sodium goes up. What are the possible causes of hypernatremia in this setting? Let's say mild elevation. You were corrected with 140, it goes to 155. What do you think is happening?
So the excess sodium we are giving, with the sodium bicarbonate correction around maybe.
What is the major determinant of serum sodium? Sodium or fluid?
Sodium is fluid.
So if you are dehydrated, so most common will be dehydration will be there in that perspective. Second is osmotic diuresis. If you're having too much hyperglycemia, it is a known cause of hypernatremia. If you give mannitol, there will be high level of sodium. But suppose I say that this child was okay, his sodium was 140, now suddenly it is 170.
And the GCS of the patient?
GCS is bad.
So that is cerebral.
So you have to ask about urine output, because this means there is a diffuse brain injury and you have DI, and then suddenly he has gone into that. So I am worried more about rapid rise in sodium. But if you have 155, 160, don't get, a lot of people get bothered that what should we do? Shall we make it N by 2, N by 3? No. At 164, normal saline itself is hypoosmolar. We are talking about a hyperosmolar state, and if you suddenly shrink him, he will have a problem. So plasma osmolality may actually be a better marker, or a corrected sodium will be a better marker than just sodium. So we'll talk about how we ignored hypernatremia in this case, because that was a major concern of the ICU team. But otherwise, it is a common finding which we see in this severe case. It may happen because of dehydration, because of mannitol if it is given ever, or because of too much sodium we are giving also. So that also will accumulate in that setting. So that's important. So what do you monitor? You monitor GCS. If the GCS is bad at admission, it may be cerebral edema. So be wary that at admission, if the GCS is bad, think of cerebral edema, manage like that. Again, relevant in this case, which we'll discuss. Your hydration should improve, but again, how do you measure hydration? And I would say the most important thing in that setting is urine output. If your urine output is below 1 ml per kg per hour, this is a dangerous sign. Why? Because this may mean there is a renal failure which is developing. You're giving too much fluid. And if somebody develops renal failure, what will happen? There will be cerebral edema, there will be pulmonary edema. So try to pick up renal dysfunction before it really becomes significant. So urine output is the most important thing to look at on follow-up along with GCS. Sodium, as I said, if there is some rise, I'm not bothered. Too rapid rise, DI could be a possibility. If you have fall in sodium with polyuria, what do you think?
So fall in sodium, so it can be cause of the cerebral edema. We are giving so much fluids.
Fall in sodium, what could be the possible cause? Sudden fall in sodium. Like sudden rise, we said DI. Sudden fall? Child was very sick, dehydrated, very, very sick, and suddenly he has polyuria and his sodium goes down. Tubular necrosis. So if you have a tubular damage, you will also have a sudden hyponatremia. So if your sodium goes too low also, that could be one of the possibilities. And then that is a risk of cerebral edema. That itself can cause cerebral edema later on. Potassium, of course, we discussed should be stable. If it goes down, you are in danger. And then if the potassium is below, you might have to push potassium very rapidly. We gave 4 infusions in this case of rapid potassium correction, which was important. And ketones. Now, what will happen to ketone, Dr. Prateek?
So ketones have initially they will rise, but then following that, if they go higher, you should not take that into account because it has a ceiling effect.
Yeah. So there is, if you talk about correlation between the pH, or let's say the base excess and the ketones, it is a curve which will increase and at some point of time it will stabilize. So let's say if your ketone is above 3, your acidosis is there. Now above 3, you can't really say that, okay, 6 is more, pH will be worse, and 5, the pH will be less. So it may happen that your initial ketone may actually rise during treatment, which is not a cause of concern. So I would not even look at ketone for 4 to 6 hours. After 6 to 8 hours, they will start coming down, and then you will have improvement which will happen in that regard. So this is something which is very, very important. Now, what about complications? We all know about cerebral edema, which is usually, now some people say that cerebral edema is not because of fluid, it is because of disease. So they say it's a vascular hypoperfusion, reperfusion. So that is the problem, something like HIE-like state. So some say if you have a severe disease, you will have cerebral edema. Too much fluid, of course, more than 3 liters per meter square per day, double maintenance. So this is something which you don't want to do. And in 4 hours, don't give more than 40 ml per kg. Bicarb, nobody gives it, which is good. So it's important. Osmotic shift, of course, will happen. Now, this is a major cause of mortality and morbidity. Give less fluid and slow correction and mannitol should be given immediately. Now, do you prefer mannitol or 3% saline in this setting? Why?
So because it itself has a disease modifying effect in the vasculature and it acts very rapidly.
So if it was only osmolar, then 3% saline and mannitol are equivalent. But people say there is also a cytotoxic component there, and therein mannitol becomes important. So I'll always prefer mannitol to other agents in that perspective. Hypokalemia, often insulin therapy, and often we give insulin and dextrose, which is a treatment of hyperkalemia. So then your potassium will go in the cell. So in that case, you reduce insulin, correct potassium, look at magnesium. That will be the thing to go forward. Acidosis, as we have discussed already, can be because of ketosis, infections, renal failure. But very importantly, if the child is bad and you have acidosis, then you should be worried. If child is improving and if the acidosis is persisting, don't treat acidosis, treat the child. That is the big message, because that could be a hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, which is there in that perspective. Never give soda bicarbonate unless there is a complete cardiac failure or there are problems with regards to severe refractory hyperkalemia, which is there in that regards. There could be infections, there could be thrombosis. So never put a central line unless you don't have access. And if you put central line, give low molecular weight heparin in that regards. And rhabdomyolysis is something which is often missed. Anybody with severe decay less than 7 pH is a risk for rhabdomyolysis. Hypophosphatemia is the biggest predictor of rhabdomyolysis, and you can have microscopic hematuria. Then you will have macroscopic hematuria. You will then have a rise of CPK. Then you will have a renal dysfunction. So if you pick it up at the right time, you can save the child. If you don't pick up at the right time, if you pick up by renal failure, then you do dialysis and whatever. So that's basically too late. So this is what we will be discussing. How this case we picked up, that was one positive thing we did at the right time. So cerebral edema, which we have discussed already, is because of all the osmotic shifts. Suddenly, because of hyperglycemia, the fluid had come out and your glucose comes down, you will have sudden fluid overload, which will happen in terms of cerebral edema, which is the cause. Now, there is a hypothesis which talks that it is probably not because of this whole process. It is basically because of the severity of disease, which is there. Now, risk factors are severe disease. So if your pH is less than 6.9, I would say that's a big risk factor. If you give insulin bolus, which we are not giving right now, if you give too much fluid, more than 3 liters per meter square, soda bicarb, these are all risk factors. What are the problems? You can have it at diagnosis. How common do you think, Dr. Pratik, is it at diagnosis?
It is common, especially when you've been given boluses from outside.
So if somebody has been treated from outside, that is a major risk factor. And our experience, usually it is more common with outside treatment. So that itself is a risk factor. So I will consider 3 predictors of cerebral edema in a resource poor setting: pH less than 6.9, outside treatment, and a CO2 less than 10. What does CO2 less than 10 mean, Dr. Vibha? So even if your bicarb is 3, let's say the lowest bicarb, your CO2 should be 1.5 times that plus 8. That will be like 12.5. CO2 less than 10 would mean that there is a respiratory alkalosis which is going on top of that metabolic acidosis, which means that you are hyperventilating, which means that you already either have cerebral edema or you are very close to cerebral edema. So CO2 less than 10 is a major thing which you have to consider as a risk of cerebral edema. If you have that, correct over 72 hours. Don't correct over 48 hours. Take your time. Take it over 72 hours, which becomes important. It is, some people say it's not related to osmolality, and then comes the cytotoxic theory that this is basically a hypoperfusion, reperfusion injury, which is there in that perspective. So I think with that sort of background, what we'll do is that we'll start the case. So Dr. Pratik, you will maybe start off with what the initial aspects were, and then Dr. Vibha will start discussing about it.
So we had recently encountered a very complicated and challenging case of decay in our ICU. So it was a 9-year-old male child who presented with increased frequency of urination and polyuria polydipsia since 2 days. And since 1 day, he was suffering from rapid breathing and altered sensorium. So now the history of presenting illness, he was all right 20 days back when he developed few episodes of vomiting, which subsided. But then there was increased frequency of urination and increased thirst, and then rapid breathing as explained. Going by the past history, there was nothing significant. So Dr. Vibha, can you just explain what each of these mean? In the sense, what do you mean? Why is there increased frequency of urination? Why is there rapid breathing in DK?
So increased frequency of urination because of his blood sugar was rising on due to the osmotic diuresis. He was having osmotic diuresis and rapid breathing due to he was developing due to the acidotic breathing.
So this
And,
is when you assume that this is DK.
Yes, sir.
Now,
Yes,
if
sir.
you have a child who comes to you with polyuria and who comes to you with rapid breathing, what are the possible causes you will think of? You don't know that this is
Yes,
DK.
sir. Polyuria and rapid breathing. So it could be adrenal insufficiency.
Okay. So one is, of course, DK will, of course, should be there in your mind, number
First
one.
diagnosis will
Second,
be. And
RTA or some
RTA,
form tubular injury. If
injury.
it's acute, you can think of that can cause acidotic breathing and that polyuria will be there.
polyuria.
Adrenal insufficiency, why will you have acidotic breathing? That becomes less
Okay,
likely. So we
yes,
talk about two possibilities,
Yes.
RTA and DK will be there.
Yes,
So
sir.
this, of course, we know that this is DK. We'll go beyond the basics. We can carry forward from there.
So initial general examination, child was sick looking. Vitals showed that there was tachypnea. The BP was 110/70. He was afebrile. The tongue was dry. He appeared dehydrated. CRT more than 3 seconds. The peripheries were cold. It was tachypnic and altered sensorium was there, and fruity odor was present. And weight was 31 kgs. So Dr. Vibha, can you explain each of the examination points that you've given, why they're important?
So thin build could be explained, might be during the course of time, he has lost some weight and sick looking he was having a fever for around 20 days back and he was quite dehydrated and he was like not eaten well. So might be looking sick looking, dry tongue because he was breathing by mouth or he was having acidotic breathing at that time. So
was
tongue
that
was
over,
dry.
as sir explained, are you overestimating or you underestimating?
So at that time, we were overestimating the dehydration and the capillary refill time was greater than 3 seconds, which was like there's poor perfusion due to dehydration. Peripheries were cold because at that time, this epinephrine levels were high, which causes the vasoconstriction, which made the peripheries cold. And he was tachypnic and it rapid deep breathing, which shows like a Kussmaul's breathing and the altered
What do
sensorium.
you think is the level of dehydration, Dr. Vibha, at this level?
So, like around
Because the
7 to
CFC
10
is full on.
It's
so
very
it's severe.
So it has to be 10% and beyond. And the pulse rate is tachycardia is also there. So you have to look at other
Other
features.
features.
He doesn't have a hypotension. Why?
So because at this time, if so he doesn't have because this counter-regulatory hormones.
So you
were
already said that
excess.
he is already on epinephrine. That's why he's like on epinephrine infusion. So
Yes,
that's
sir.
why he has peripheries which are cold, which is preserving his BP
BP.
in that regard. Yeah.
So one point over here I would like to mention is GCS as calculated by many of they are grossly, I think, overestimate the type of altered sensorium there is. So unless the child is responding to touch, and I feel you can take it as okay, and rather than, because many patients will get GCS 9, 10 and they start ventilating. So
The
that is
very
one thing.
important thing to remember is that you have to be very careful in GCS. There is no compromise on that. If GCS is low in this setting, this is a very bad sign. So they have mentioned altered sensorium in GCS, which to me means that it is very severe. Carry forward.
So initial examination showed that there was tachypnea, there was deep abdominothoracic breathing, there was nasal flaring, CVS was okay, and CNS was drowsy. The GCS was around 11, bilateral pupils reacting to light, and no meningeal signs.
So what could be the other pointers to cerebral edema at presentation?
So the pointers like, sir, any complaint of headache or vomiting or pupils, as the pupils were reacting to light, and so we can see
GCS, low GCS is a pointer.
Yes, sir.
If you have anisocoria, you have bradycardia, hypertension, brisk reflexes. So these will be very, very important. But other thing which may indicate is that there is a focal deficit. That is very important, especially if you have an ocular palsy. That could be one thing which is there. Then if you have enuresis suddenly, which is developing in somebody who was normal in that perspective, and tonic posturing, of course, will be the features which will suggest you. So this is something, in this case, you have to have look at all these parameters in that regard.
Now, the initial investigation showed that the RBS was 483, ketones were 4.6, and VBG. So initially what we have a diabetes is there, that is, we have hyperglycemia, we have ketones. So then the next obvious investigation was VBG, which showed pH of 6.5, CO2 of 9, lactate of 1.1, bicarb of 1.6, and base excess of -32. So Dr. Vibha, can you explain the VBG and what is going on here?
So as the pH is 6.8, which shows there is a severe acidosis. PCO2 is 9, as I said, it indicates like we have to be very cautious when the PCO2 is less than 10, because there is a chance of respiratory alkalosis, and which can give rise to the cerebral edema. And the base excess is also like a very patient is very deficient at the base site. This is -32. So we'll start the treatment on the basis of severe decay.
So this is definitely severe. This is very severe.
Keep in mind for
You
reading.
won't get anything more severe than that because bicarb is 1.6.
Yes.
Now, which of these parameters are actually measured and which of these are calculated?
So bicarb is measured and pH is measured.
Hmm.
Rest are calculated.
Okay, so CO2 is calculated based upon that. So if your bicarb is too low, then your coefficient of variation will become huge. So this 1.8, 1.6 may be 0 also. Like next time you do it may come as 0. So don't get too bothered. Once you get bicarb of 0, your results will be absolutely convenient because then it's all calculation based. So I have seen patients who actually had a bicarb of 0 and pH was 7.1 report. So people were very happy with that report. No, that's very, very bad. So this bicarb of 1.6 is what I'm looking at, the most important part, that this is the most severely affected part, which is there. And he is very severe DKA with a very high risk of severity. That is what we'll discuss in that. Yeah.
So as per severe DKA treatment, the first bolus was given 10 ml per kg, and then fluid correction over 48 hours were taken considering deficit and maintenance fluids.
So what is missing? Which part should have been here, Dr. Vibha? Which thing is not there?
So actually we calculate the fluid for 48 hours.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Which parameter you like to have? Lab parameter?
Yes, potassium is very high.
So we should have got potassium, or we should have looked at the ECG, whether there are ECG changes or not, because if you have a pH of 6.8, hypokalemia is very likely. Hypokalemia now, but at least later will be very likely, and hypophosphatemia will be very likely. So now this was done. Do you agree with this management?
So no.
Why?
So actually, when this we are calculate, this is severe dehydration, and this is 10% we are correcting for, and so we have to calculate the fluid for 72 hours. And if this is a severe acidosis, so we have to calculate give the fluid over 72 hours, not over the 42.
So I said there are 3 risk factors for severe edema. One is outside treatment, which was not done in this case. pH less than 6.9, which is there. CO2 less than 10. So this is a very, very high risk factor. Either he is into cerebral edema or he is developing. So we should have given more longer correction over 72 hours rather than 48 hours. Okay.
So insulin was started at 0.1 units per kg per hour.
Do you agree with that insulin dose, Dr. T?
Sir, yes. I mean, we should keep in mind everything. We have a high risk of cerebral edema. We don't know the potassium levels. So we should first consider that and then think of whether bringing it down.
I think insulin is not an emergency. By the time you get the report, maybe potassium is not available, but by the time you start insulin, you should know the potassium and then start it.
So this is a very important table. This is how the exact trend went. So if we go by the starting at 6 hours, we have a pH of less than 6.8. Bicarb was undetectable. Here, one important point is the potassium was 3.6.
No, hold on. Do you think this 6 hour the patient is worsened, Dr. Vibha, or what is happening to this patient? Now you see that the bicarb is undetectable. What do you think? Compared to the previous report, is it worse or is it same or is it better?
It was worse.
But it is not worse because that time it was 1.6. So 1.6 and 0 is nothing. So this is, I would say, same. So don't get too worried about this. What I am going to be worried about this is the potassium. Now this potassium of 3.6 what would be the corrected potassium? Now, if we say his pH was normal, what will be his potassium, roughly?
So with 0.1 decrease, 1.6 will increase. So it's
Almost zero.
Zero.
So
Very
roughly
zero.
zero. So
Zero.
effectively, he has no potassium in the body. And this 3.6 is going to be low very soon, which is, if you follow just potassium, we'll go one by one. If you follow potassium by 18 hours, this is what happened. He went into 2.6. So now this becomes important. If we had known potassium from the beginning, and we say if it is less than 3.5, you start in the hydration phase, you start giving the potassium. But I would say at 3.6 with a pH of 6.8, you better give potassium at that point itself. So this potassium is the biggest problem that I'm seeing in this. Of course, CO2 and all were a problem. Now this CO2 is 19. What do you think about this? How has it become 19? It was 9 last time. Because there is no bicarb, so the whole calculation is going here and there. So this, don't rely on this CO2. It is not going to be reliable at this point of time. So first was very important in that perspective. So now what we see in this case, I would be very bothered about the potassium at this point of time. So what was done for potassium here, Dr. Vibha?
So at 12 hour, initially we started with the with 14 milliequivalent in the fluid. Then at 12 hours, when the potassium we observed, the potassium is 3.23. We increased 40 milliequivalent to 60 milliequivalent. And in addition, we saw the phosphate is also low, 1.06. So we added K-phos in the fluid.
Okay. So it was increased to 60. And at that point also, when your potassium is 3.2, there are two things you will do. One, you will think of decreasing insulin. That will be the first thing. The second would be to give boluses. So I think at that point of time, a potassium bolus was also given at 3.23. But still after that, your potassium is 2.6. What do you think is happening, Dr. Pratik?
So the answer is right here. We have a hypophosphatemia going on along with it. So that can explain the, the potassium not improving despite us giving the potassium supplement.
And there is a huge, as we said, it is zero. And now what's happening in the pH? If you look at the 18-hour pH, what is happening now?
Slightly improving.
So bicarb is improving, your acidosis is becoming better. So your potassium is going into the cell. So as simple as that. So even if we give 0.3 millimoles per kg correction once, it still became 2.6. Now, I have seen patients who have received treatment outside without potassium, their potassium goes to 1.5. So this is not unusual, but we have to be very careful. So this is 2.6. So what should we do at 2.6?
So at 2.6, we have given the potassium correction with 3.3 milliequivalent per kg per dose twice. And we give it over 2 to 4 hours.
And we reduce the
insulin dose for 0.1 to 0.05.
This is very important to understand, because now if you look at it, 6 hours, there is hardly any improvement in blood gas. The bicarb is 5 and 6. But I am not that bothered about acidosis here. I am bothered about hypokalemia. Because if we continue with insulin and if we do not correct potassium, he'll die because of hypokalemia, because it's 2.6. So it is like a bargain. So whenever you are playing chess, you have to bargain, okay, I want to sacrifice this particular piece for the bigger piece. So here, the only sacrifice we made is that, okay, let the acidosis get corrected slower. Let's cut the insulin in half and give a lot of potassium so as to save him. Because despite all that, his potassium only became 2.94. And the other thing was that the acidosis improved gradually from there. The other big change which we did was the potassium phosphate. We started right at 1.06. So why do you think that? Because that was relevant.
So because as it will, sir, on the pH is less.
It will help improving the phosphorus.
So otherwise, phosphorus would have. You can see, despite that, it fell down. What is the cutoff of phosphorus we are worried about?
Or less than 1.
So less than 1 is a risk factor for rhabdomyolysis. So if you are just at the border, better to start at the right time. We started at that time, even then it became 0.8. And then it took time to increase. So I think as a big message, anybody who has this severe acidosis, even if you don't get phosphorus report, start potassium chloride and potassium phosphate half. That will be the best way forward to avoid the situation from happening. And be proactive on potassium in this regards. Now, what do you see from here, Dr. Pratik, with regards to the sodium levels? I think that's also an interesting thing which is happening on sodium.
Sir, as you mentioned, what we saw in this patient, we did see a gradual rise of sodium. It went from 133 to 154, almost 161. But it was not associated with increased polyuria, any worsening of sensorium, or any worsening of any other parameters. So we were not really concerned about that.
So the ICU team was very, very concerned about this level of sodium, that the sodium is increasing. Now, first of all, you need to understand that by that time, the sugars would have come down by 500 points, which means you need to subtract 10 or you add 10 there, you make it corrected 143. So there is an increase is there, but not a huge increase. I'm not going to be bothered about this 160, 161. It is going to improve. This is because of phosphatic diuresis, dehydration. So at different times, we have got different priorities. First priority was cerebral edema and diagnosis in this case. Second was hypokalemia. And then once hypokalemia goes off, then you will come to acidosis. This is how this happened in that perspective. So what you're seeing here is that the phosphorus level kept up increasing and the sodium level then stabilized at around 160, 161. What about acidosis now? This is the third thing that we're looking at.
So acidosis was decreasing.
But is it increasing at the right time? What is the usual time for resolution of hyperglycemia, ketosis, and acidosis and decay?
So hyperglycemia by 6 to 8 hours, and the ketones will decrease by around 10 hours, and the acidosis is last to decrease around 12 or
12 to 18 hours. But what is happening at 24 hours? You have got a base excess of minus 22. Now the ICU team is getting jittery. That why is it is not increasing? What should we do? At 36 hours, minus 20 base excess. Are you concerned, Dr. Pratik, about that acidosis? Because I would be much more concerned at 24 hours with the potassium rather than sodium, rather than base excess. Because he is not going to die because of this hypernatremia. He is not going to die because of acidosis. He is going to die because of hypokalemia. So this acidosis now is there, but this is on purpose. As discussed, we have sacrificed our pawn for a bigger piece. In chess, as we say, that we are okay, we fine, we are accepting acidosis, but we don't want hypokalemia to happen. And this is what is proven. Now, what is happening here is that he gradually had a very slow improvement. And now, by the time our potassium became above 4, so this was 36 hours. That was the time when we thought, okay, now things are better. Our phosphorus is good. Our potassium is good. Now we can think about acidosis, and then we up the insulin dose. So insulin was low throughout that period. And that's why once we up the dose and then the acidosis gradually improved. But more than acidosis, what we are seeing greater rise is the BICA. Now BICA becomes 10. Nobody is going to die because of this acidosis, and base excess is minus 16. But still at 60, 62 hours, base excess is minus 16. Now, what is the possible cause that you think, Dr. Vibhai here?
So one of the most common cause is the disease itself, but at this time we say
ketone is how much?
Is less than 0.6. Like
so ketone resolved within 36 hours. If ketones were there.
Ketones are out. Now coming to the next cause is the lactic acidosis, which could be due to the hypophosphatemia or any infection. So we have ruled out the infection. There was no focal cause of infection. Third is this hyperchloremic metabolic.
Before that?
Before is this.
And you are seeing that also. What else is causing what else is causing acidosis in this case? You can see one of the reports. So what you're seeing is that creatinine from 0.77 jumped to 1.05, jumped to 1.3. I think it went to 1.6 also. In occasion, it went really high, which is missing here. What is happening? Why is this renal dysfunction happening? Pratik.
So we have two answers in this. First of all, we can see a slight increase in CPK, and because we had some actual RBCs were also present slightly. So that is one clause, but the child was similarly stable. Second thing over here is, first of all, the child is dehydrated. So for the pre-renal failure could be possible.
What is against severe dehydration in this case?
So his general pH is improving and his urine output is stable.
And
uric acid. Sorry.
So uric acid is not hugely high. So we thought of that possibility. There are two possibilities of renal dysfunction here. One is a rhabdomyolysis. So what is happening is that you had this phosphorus, which was 1.06. We gave phosphorus, yet it came below 0.82. And at that point, if you look at creatinine, it started to go up. So which means that there was something which happened at that time. And there were a lot of microscopic hematuria. I think they were full of RBCs, which were there reported. CPK, I'm not sure it is not that high. We expected it to be higher. But yes, if you have hypophosphatemia, if you have microscopic hematuria, if your creatinine is rising, I would say that will be a primary thing. Of course, if you think of fluid, because we were under on fluid also. As soon as we got the GCS going down, we reduced the infusion rate also, corrected over 72 hours. So that also was there. So we corrected that, but still the creatinine kept rising to 1.61, and then gradually it started to recover. So this acidosis delayed recovery could have been renal dysfunction. And then, of course, hyperchloremic acidosis towards the end of it, because a lot of sodium chloride has gone into the system in that perspective. Now, what is happening to phosphorus, Dr. Vibha? What do you see? So it improved and then
Decreased. No, sir.
it increased significantly. So if
significantly.
the phosphorus goes up, why are you bothered, Dr. Manu? If the phosphorus goes up high, what may be the problem?
So again, phosphorus high level can be indicated of renal failure.
No, you're giving phosphorus. No? So phosphorus high will cause what? Hypocalcemia. So you have to monitor calcium whenever you are giving too much phosphorus. So then we stopped phosphorus. So again, a big message is that don't just start giving phosphorus. We had to give much higher dose of phosphorus. In fact, at one point of time, we gave entire potassium correction using phosphorus. And then after that, what we did was that we had to come down on the phosphorus. So if you give too much phosphorus, you can have hypocalcemia, which was important. So phosphorus is an important message coming out here. Potassium, he required, I think, 4 to 6 infusions of potassium. And then also his potassium was 3.9, 3.4. So he was actually on oral potassium even at discharge. So if you don't do correctly in the beginning of potassium, your potassium will be very low throughout the course. So now if we go one by one, just to summarize everything, so within this one, so what we are seeing is that the first 12 hours, 6 hours, the major concern was cerebral edema. So we reduced the fluid rate. After 6 hours, potassium came into the picture. So we started correcting the potassium very rapidly. Then phosphorus from 12 hours. So we started phosphorus at that point of time. Then renal dysfunction. So we gave then more boluses on that. And finally, it was acidosis, which was there. Key parameters which we routinely don't do, which were done in this case, were phosphorus, magnesium, which is not mentioned, urine RM for abdomyolysis, and uric acid to look for fluid status. How does uric acid tell you about fluid status, Dr. Vibha?
So the more the fluid status of the body, the more the excretion of uric acid. So lesser the value it will be. Sir.
So uric acid excretion depends upon the plasma volume. Higher volume, higher excretion, lower uric acid. So this 4 is considered the cutoff when you talk about SiADH versus a hypovolemia. So this was 5.4, some hypovolemia, but not hugely hypovolemia. So I think now this is quite clear from that perspective. We can go forward from there.
So in this case, in the sense that all the guidelines they mention, when we have normal potassium levels, you start at 40. Do we do any preemptive measures because we have a pH less than 6.8? So any importance of giving extra potassium here?
You should have given. Yeah. So this is so guidelines are just guidelines. Yes, you can't use guidelines for a routine for everybody. It will depend upon that. So that's what I'm saying. That this 3.66 is very, very low. And as soon as your acidosis improves, which happened, there will be a huge problem. So you should have started. Ideally, I would have given right at the beginning at the hydration state only. So even there, I would have given maybe 10 millimoles, 20 millimoles per liter in the first bolus, and then avoided insulin. Then start on that, because giving insulin was actually going to do more harm in this perspective. So this is very important on that.
So as this is basically a graphical representation of what really happened.
So you can explain, Dr. Vibha?
Yes.
So essentially what you are saying is that.
So the yellow line is showing the potassium. As we see, the potassium starts dropping at the 12 hour, and we increase the potassium from 40 milliequivalent to 60 milliequivalent. Now coming to this 18 hour, where the value is 2.3, we give the KCL bolus to give the potassium correction, and then we have to give 4 boluses of the potassium to increase it up to this 4.18. And when the value increases up to 4.18, here we decreases the potassium. We stop the bolus and we decrease the potassium in the solution to 40 milliequivalent per, and here we increases the insulin to again 0.1 unit per kg per hour.
So again, same message that insulin should reduce, and then you should do. The other thing that sodium, which was going up, don't get too much bothered about sodium. A lot of intensive care continuously they were asking about sodium. I said forget about it. Let's manage potassium correctly. Let's manage phosphorus correctly. Yeah. Next.
And here,
Yeah, you can carry forward.
okay.
Next.
These are the trends as we see in the venous blood gas, and the pH here shows the increasing trend. Now the complication that we have
So what
faced
are
in the,
complications did you observe in this one?
yeah. First was the cerebral edema.
So was there cerebral edema in this case?
So on the cerebral edema, there was some kind, because the GCS status was decreased from 11 to 9, but there was no signs in the pupil as there was
So what
no.
are the criteria for cerebral edema in DK? Major and minor criteria.
So there's major criteria, minor criteria, and diagnostic criteria. So in the major criteria, we have any sudden posturing, anisocoria, increased vomiting. In the minor criteria also.
So focal deficit, the one I'm discussing about is incontinence, which was there, focal deficits, which were starting to appear, hypertension, bradycardia. So they have specific criteria. So let's not be too loose in terms of diagnosing cerebral edema also. So a lot of people are now talking about, because they know diagnosing cerebral edema is very difficult. So people talk about altered mentation as a criteria. So we can consider it to be altered mentation. Now, if your pH is 0, like 6 bicarb is 0, you will obviously be in some form of altered mentation. It doesn't really mean that you are in cerebral edema. So be cautious, but don't start mannitol. Did we give mannitol?
No,
in this
sir,
case? So we did
didn't
not. So you have to
give
be cautious
mannitol.
because don't give it too much mannitol. Then there will be a heart attack, because then the sodium would have gone up and the ICU team would have thought of why is the sodium going up further. So this was not really, he was at risk cerebral edema, I would say, but not really cerebral edema. Yeah. Hypokalemia, of course. Yeah, carry forward.
Hypophosphatemia, and of course the renal failure. As we have discussed, the GCS dropped down from 11 to 9, and there was severe acidosis. So we plan to decrease the fluid rate, and we corrected over from 48 to 72 hours. And
so we gave some basic things like head end elevation, fluid restriction, that sort of a thing. Suppose his GCS was falling further, would you like to do intubate and hyperventilate him immediately?
So we would not intubate the child immediately, because if we intubate, there will be this increase in the carbon dioxide, and this will further cause the CNS acidosis. And
see, he's already hyperventilating. His CO2 is 9. What else you want? What is the target CO2 in hyperventilation? When you do for his ICP sign?
So it's more than 10.
20, 25, not 10. It's like a reasonably high. So it's already 9. What else will you achieve on that? As you do a intubation, the raised ICT will happen, the pressure will increase. So ventilation should be deferred in DK unless the child is actually nearly dying. Worst case scenario, I've seen cases who have anisocoria, give mannitol, within 10 minutes they are much better. So I think patience is the main thing in that perspective. So yes, so this was at risk, but we did not diagnose cerebral edema here. What about hypokalemia? We know, yeah. For
the hypokalemia, firstly, it was due to insulin as initial electrolytes we didn't have, but it could be due to insulin deficiency.
Insulin excess.
Sorry. We increased the fluid potassium in the fluid to 60 milliequivalent. Then we give the correction, and then we decrease the insulin from 0.1 to 0.05.
So how could we have prevented this, Dr.
So a few changes we could have made, like first of all, decrease the fluid rate as soon as possible, make it 72 hours. Then if we're expecting a potassium, we can defer the insulin for some 1 or 2 hours and see the improvement in potassium. And next, we could have given 60 MEQ in the first, or as you said, so 20 MEQ in the bolus as well.
And if you're starting insulin, start at 0.05. Like, what is the hurry? That's what I'm trying to say. That this 0.05 is a proven therapy. There are studies which show that 0.05 and 0.1 are similar, except that 0.05 causes longer duration of resolution. So you could have started 0.05 in this severe cases. So again, this is the big message. Of course, when you are managing a case like this, it is not very easy. At that time, hundreds of things are happening. But on hindsight, and this is the main message we are trying to give, that's why we are having this discussion, is that we should we do less. So we should have given less fluid, we should have given less insulin, we should have given more potassium. This is what would have happened, and phosphorus was something which was important.
We have also faced hypophosphatemia. because rhabdomyolysis occurs, and we also got RBCs in the urine. We gave supplementation of phosphorus in the fluid, and there was a renal failure
And
also.
simultaneously, why I have put up this case also is that on the same week, I got 2 more calls from different places in the country where similar case had come. I think you also heard about one similar case in which pH was undetectable, and all of them went into renal failure. So what I'm trying to say is that phosphorus is something which is often missed in the management. And if we had missed phosphorus, we might also have landed into renal failure. If you have renal failure in DK, that is, your battle is lost. Then the only thing you can do is quick hemodialysis. Quickly you can do that is the only thing. Otherwise, acidosis will become too much. Fluid overload will become too much. So phosphorus is very important. So I think again, a big message on hindsight is anybody who is such severe, start phosphorus. How do we get phosphorus? Is it available easily,
Yes, sir,
the
yes,
cost
sir.
and everything?
So, sir, we now KPhos is available easily, and it is very easy to give it in the fluid also. It's just the half the amount of KCl.
So I would say from here on, we should give everybody who is such severe, pH less than 6.9, we start with potassium phosphate. It's like 80-100 rupees only, the vial which is there. So it's not a costly thing, it's available. We should not, and this can cause life and death, as we saw in those 2 cases. What happened to that case also had a bad outcome. So renal failure is the main thing. If it becomes renal failure, you are too late.
As sir has already discussed, the cause of renal failure was dehydration and rhabdomyolysis, and the creatinine was also high. We have not given aggressive fluid treatment for renal failure because
So did the urine output go down in this?
no,
case?
sir, the urine output was always greater than 2 ml per kg per
So
hour.
I think that was a good point, that he did not really have the oliguria which was happening. So that's why because phosphorus was corrected quickly.
The blood glucose reduced over the due course of time, and we added 5% dextrose when it decreases to less than 300, and when it decreases to 200, we added dextrose in the fluid.
So often there is a problem that your sugar is now 300 below, you give 5%, 200 below, you give 10%, then it goes up to 400. So then how do you keep on changing the fluid every time? You're already giving potassium in that. So Pratik, what will be the solution?
Sir, we can monitor the trends of the sugars, but main is the keto and the acidosis. They're improving, you can just switch to
Or
supplement.
something you can do is that you can give NS with potassium on one and dextrose on the other. So you can add dextrose, remove dextrose. That is the easier way. So you have two piggyback bottles which you can give dextrose separately, because this often sister will then, because otherwise sister is going to be really bothered about all that changing so much fluid. So every time you say now it is 290, make it 5%, it is 310, make it. So you have to be, first of all, if it is borderline, don't bother. Otherwise, better is one is normal saline, you add dextrose and you tell her that this much from this much from this. That will be a better way to go forward.
For 54 hours, the acidosis was still persistent. So as we have discussed, the cause was acidosis, could be the ketoacidosis itself, but the ketos were low at that time. So we think of about the lactic acidosis, and other was hypochloremic acidosis. So we calculated the chloride load. And
what is chloride load, Manoj?
Sodium minus chloride minus 32 should be eaten in the game of 32.
Okay. So normally sodium is 32 above the chloride level. So if the sodium minus chloride is more than 32, it would mean that there is a
Hyperchloremic.
So in this case, there was a hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, which is self-resolved. So don't get too bothered if your acidosis is persisting. You're given so much sodium chloride, which is fine.
There was no sign of infection. The screening test was negative. So when he was shifted to ward, the insulin dose was decreased to 0.05 and he was allowed orally. But at that point of time, the pH was 7.26 and the bicarbonate was 10.3.
So by the time the patient was much better, he was nearly dying and now he was much better. There was a lot of economic issues as well. So we can't keep on him in the ICU forever. He was already there for 3 days. So despite knowing fully well that he might not fit quote unquote the criteria for shifting, we did shift on that. Now we require lower amount of dose of insulin. Why? Usually DK we talk about 2.5, 3, but his requirement was not
Much
very
less.
high in the beginning.
So, yes, so he was probably received so much insulin in the initial time.
So
that
his
probably,
insulin was built up so much that it was much easier to go on a lower dose in that.
Because of the prolonged duration.
3 days he
3
got
days he got
this
3
thing.
days.
Yeah, so he got enough insulin, so all his stores were replenished in that regard. Yeah.
Then we gave the subcutaneous Lantus 30 unit. Then we gave the Epidur 10 unit, and we
So we
asked
gave
the
Lantus in the morning. So
in
this
the
is
morning.
the usual this thing. So I think this
Yeah.
is
there were hypoglycemic episodes in the ward. Then we managed it timely by giving the 10.
So again, I think the important message, we started with 2 units per kg in this case, but he developed hypoglycemia. Considering that if somebody has severe DK, you require high dose. But here for 72 hours, he received so much insulin that he did not require that high dose. That is the message which Manoj is also trying to say.
At that time, pH came normal, 7.4, and we planned to discharge. He was discharged with 0.9 unit per kg per day of insulin. And on follow-up, the potassium, the sodium was sodium potassium all came normal, and we discharged him on quattro because the potassium was on the lower side. And on the follow-up, he was taking insulin of 0.5 unit
So
per
now if you
kg
look
per
at
day.
this, what are the key messages that you get from this case? You would have managed DK earlier. What was different in this case?
So initially, what we used to do, actually, we never subtract the fluid boluses that the patient has taken from the outside, and we was not very vigilant about the cerebral edema signs, and we were not. We used to give the insulin boluses in our setting, and we were not so much vigilant about the electrolytes up and downs, and the creatinine rising and everything. So there was a lot of learning lessons from this case.
Interesting for you because you've been managing here. What do you think was
So the unique was every possible complication which we can see in DK was here. And whatever we could do when we did, and that is possibly what led to the good outcome in the patient.
So I think phosphorus was the biggest message which is coming. So if you have a very severe DK, think of hypophosphatemia because that could be a bad thing. And potassium, phosphorus should be the major part which you have to look at. Yeah.
So now the key points to remember from this case: cerebral edema. If there is a cerebral edema, go for slow correction over
So even if you're
72
thinking,
hours.
even if it's not there, it's better to be slow.
Add potassium in the hydration fluid if the potassium level is less than 3.3. Consider hypophosphatemia in case of hypokalemia. Start with low dose insulin in hypokalemia and be vigilant for urine output, creatinine, and any muscle pain.
I think this is a very good message which has come up. So this is one of the more challenging cases that you will see of DK, and that's why we thought we should highlight this in the setting because a lot of us manage DK and how do we get these complications and we can avoid them. In that perspective becomes important in that regards. Now, when we talk about DK, there are all protocols available, there are guidelines available. We know SPAT guidelines, everything is there. We have written protocol available in our department, and this is what our retrospective study, which is now being published in Indian Pediatrics, is coming up, which shows that despite all that, only 18% cases actually had a good no error. So if you look at it, 4 out of 5 cases, there was some error which was there. If you look at this case also, there are multiple errors. We are not trying to pinpoint. What I'm trying to say is that even if everything is available, you will do errors which will happen in that perspective. There is a need to improve that, and these errors cause a lot of hypoglycemia, hypokalemia, and dehydration. Now in this case, hypokalemia was because of an error. The error was you did not give potassium. You did not really correct the insulin. You did not need to give that much insulin. Hypoglycemia also happened because probably insulin was too much in this perspective. Dehydration, this was a very complicated case, so I would say that is not there. But hypokalemia was something which could have been avoided in this case because giving this 0.3 millimoles per kg per hour potassium 4-5 times is not a good thing. It is always a risk factor of cardiac illness and everything. So that was a problem. So again, protocols are there. Our unit treats so much DK, worse DKs than this also, but still errors do happen. And the first hour of management is the most important. By the time we get a call to the endocrine department or to me as an endocrine consultant, this would have already been done. So very important that right from the beginning, we have to do something which is appropriate. And that's why we have developed a lot of tools which are available over our MediClasses application, which will talk about which fluid to use, how much to use, how much dose to go, and to go forward. So if we just use this case as an example, what we are seeing here is that pH is very low. CO2 is less than 10. So correction over 72 hours right away is important. And the other thing to look at, of course, is that we have to have a risk factor for cellular edema. So this is our DKA tool. It talks about basic parameters. If the age is less than 1 year, automatically you will get a low dose of insulin, 0.05. Then we are talking about blood sugar. This is more to confirm. Ketone is, of course, positive. pH. Now, as soon as your pH is below 6.9, it will say correct over 72 hours. And CO2 is less than 10, either of two, it will say over 72 hours. Potassium, now this is a problem again. Potassium was not available. So we should have looked at potassium here. We say 3.5 to 5, ECG normal. And this is important. GCS again, if you're saying it's 11, is significant. Now what we are seeing here is that we are talking about a fluid in which you're talking about potassium in the hydration fluid also because of the severity of acidosis. And you also have a potassium which is on the lower side. That's what it is correcting there. It is correcting over a 72-hour period, and it is giving 0.05 unit per kg per hour. So all the errors, if they had just put it on the data, they also have got the application with them, but they didn't even do that. So if they had done that, it would have become much more easier from that perspective. So I think what we try to do is that we have evidence, we know how to manage, but we need to really apply at the first level, because if the primary level the problem happens, there will be an issue in that perspective. So again, this was a challenge which was there, whether it is hyperchloremic or not. So it's very simple. You look at that, if there is metabolic acidosis, you look at the ketone. So ketone is less than 1 in this case. Lactate in this case was normal. So this is hyperchloremic. You look at the anion gap, which will really summarize from that perspective. So if we just summarize everything about DKA, the first main management is fluid in the initial phase, then deficit plus maintenance over 48 hours. Give insulin 0.1, but if you have severe DKA, maybe 0.05 will be appropriate. Potassium is the most important thing to remember, potassium and phosphorus. I think this is the big message from this part. And add dextrose, of course, no soda bicarb, be aware of cerebral edema. That becomes very important. So we have always discussed this, and this is again my favorite slide, that there is a tightrope of management. If you give too little fluid, you will have dehydration. If you give too much fluid, you will have cerebral edema. If you have too little insulin, you will have slow correction, which happened in this case. And if you give too much insulin, you will have hypokalemia. So I think there will be no confusion that everybody will like to have a child who has a longer stay in the ICU, then die because of cerebral edema or hypokalemia. So what you should do is do less. Don't give more. So here, too much fluid was given, too much insulin was given. And what was not given was potassium and phosphorus. So again, balance would have really made the picture much better. And we are very happy that this was one of the most severe decays. Of course, the team did a very good job in terms of the intensive care, because this could have died and gone anywhere. But then he improved dramatically, which was good, and a lot of complications were prevented. But always there is a scope of improvement. That is what we are trying to focus on that. So again, you can all go and have a look at our website. And today evening, we're going to have a lecture on growth assessment along with some case discussion. Dr. Sonal Shah is also in our panel, who will be discussing about cases with Dr. Prateek and Dr. Sayan, which we'll discuss from there. And we'll close on to that. Vila is talking about how much bolus can be given. Can we consider more than 30 ml per kg if IVC is still compressible, or consider 1 bicarbonate? Yeah, that's a big question. So I would say more than 40 ml per kg in the first 4 hours is difficult. If you have shock, of course, you can give more and see if there is hypovolemia, look at CVP, those things will be there. But that will be very, very rare. That's very unusual in that setting. You're talking about something else which is happening on there. Now, if you give inotropes, it is going to cause a lot of problems. We have seen that you will have severe hyperglycemia. We had that patient who had, I think, MISC with the DK, very severe patient in which pressors were added. And once you add pressors, you will have hyperglycemia. It will go all over. So that's a big difficulty. Dr. Rajib is asking about what should be ideal insulin regimen in follow-up. So of course, it's basal bolus. I would say not affording glargine insulin. That will be a difficult. You can use NPH, and we've discussed a lot about this. So NPH and regular can also be given, but basal bolus is what we are looking at. Dr. Shaila is also asking about prerenal. So very importantly, in that case, you should give, if the urine output is normal, then you are not that much bothered. Maybe try to give more fluids in that perspective, and that is there. So don't give too much boluses in that perspective. Maybe 1 or 2 boluses is enough to cause this.